My husband called me a poor fat pig in front of his entire family, not knowing I was the secret billionaire who had just bought his father's failing company. He said it with a smile, with another woman watching on land that technically belonged to me. If that had been you sitting at that table, what would you have done? My name is Emma, and this is the story of how I went from being the quiet, soft, unambitious wife everyone underestimated, to the woman who fired her own husband, took his family's company, and walked away without raising her voice. Yeah, that happened. That night at the Carter family house started like a lot of nights I had already survived. Long, polished dining table, way too many wine glasses, expensive candles burning like we were trying to impress a magazine photographer. Naughty dinner. Michael, my husband, sat in the middle, the unofficial golden son. Shoulders tense from carrying the family legacy, as he liked to call it. His mother hovered at one end, his father at the other, and tucked neatly into the mix was a guest who just happened to be there. Jessica, official title, financial assistant at Carter Industries. Real role at that table. The woman my husband saved his real smiles for. I came in carrying a casserole. His mom once complimented years ago, cheeks a little flushed from the oven, wearing a simple dress that skimmed over my soft hips and rounded stomach. Nothing fancy, nothing flashy. My jewelry was minimal, my makeup light, my hair pulled back in a way that made me feel comfortable rather than stunning. To that family, I was the plain, quiet wife from a modest background who tagged along. To me, I was just trying to hold my marriage together. Michael's mother took the casserole from my hands and gave me that tight, polite smile she always wore like a mask. She leaned closer so no one else would hear and said, "Emma, dear, maybe skip the bread tonight. You know how family dinners can add on." Her eyes dropped for one quick second to my waist, then snapped back to my face with a fake little chuckle. I laughed too. That awkward automatic laugh you do when you've been trained not to make scenes, and passed the bread basket on without taking any. Pattern interrupt, that was the last time I ever tried to please that woman. We all sat down at the table, and the performance began. His father talked about the company's problems like it was the weather. His brother bragged about some car he wanted to buy, even though the business was drowning in debt. Jessica inserted herself with these perfectly timed, careful phrases, just enough to sound respectful, just enough to sound smart, not enough to sound threatening. She sat a little too close to Michael. He didn't mind. I sat near the far end, like a guest too far away to participate. Naturally close enough to hear every word they didn't want to say directly to my face. The room smelled like roasted meat, expensive wine, and tension. That soft, thick kind of tension where everyone knows something is wrong, but nobody wants to be the one to break it. You know what I mean, right? Where the silence is louder than the conversation. At one point, trying to reach across the distance between us, I said gently, "Michael, do you think there's any way I could help with the company? Even just a little, I could review some reports with you, or maybe talk through ideas at home." He didn't even let me finish. He exhaled this long, annoyed breath and scoffed, "Emma, there you go again, talking about things you don't understand." He didn't look at me, didn't even glance down the table. He just kept his eyes on his plate, and then briefly on Jessica like I was some background noise he had to tolerate. That one hurt, but it wasn't new. It was just one more cut on top of 1,000. I told myself what I always told myself. He's stressed. It's the company. It's not really about me. I swallowed. It smiled weakly, and took a sip of water I suddenly couldn't taste. And then it got worse. By the time the main course hit the table, I could feel something building in him. His jaw was tight. His hand kept flexing around his glass. He was drinking a little too fast. His father had made some pointed comment about responsibility and pressure, His mother was hovering over everyone's plates, and Jessica was just there, soaking it all in. I said something small. Honestly, I don't even remember exactly what it was. Something about how maybe cutting certain costs might help, or asking if the bank could give them an extension. It wasn't a big, bold statement. It was just a wife trying to show she cared. Michael slammed his fork down and shoved his chair back so hard, the leg screeched across the tile. Every single person at that table froze. Forks, glasses, conversations all suspended in the air. "This is ridiculous," he snapped, voice too loud, too sharp. "This whole night, this whole conversation, all of it." He wasn't yelling at his father. He wasn't yelling at the numbers on the spreadsheets I never got to see. He was yelling at me. "Emma," he said, finally. Looking straight at me, eyes full of something that wasn't love anymore. "Why don't you just stop talking? You never say anything useful anyway." I felt my heart drop to my stomach. The room went quiet. Even the candles felt like they flickered. I could have let it go there. I could have taken it like I had taken every other little jab. But he wasn't done. He leaned back in his chair, smirked a little, and said loud and clear, "You're just a poor fat pig. You should be grateful that anyone married you." Silence. His mother looked down at her napkin, biting her lip, but saying nothing. His father stared at his plate, jaw clenched, more embarrassed by the scene than by the cruelty. His brother cleared his throat like he might speak up, then didn't. Jessica looked straight at me over the rim of her wine glass and smiled. "Do you think that's fair? Be honest with yourself." My hands started to shake in my lap. My face felt hot. My ears were buzzing. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in the back of my throat. For a second, the room blurred. For a second, I was sure I was going to cry in front of all of them. And then out of nowhere, I saw something else. I saw myself at 13 years old, standing in a private school hallway. My mother had worked herself half to death to pay for while 3 girls circled me laughing. "Why are you so quiet? Say something. Look at her. She's so weird. She's getting chubby. Have you noticed?" I remembered going home that day, slamming my bedroom door and sobbing into my pillow until my chest hurt. My mother, Olivia, came in, sat on the edge of my bed, and waited until I could breathe again. She brushed my hair out of my face and said, "Emma, a gentle heart is not a weak one. Your softness, inside and out, is not something to be ashamed of. One day, they'll learn that. Just don't let their smallness shrink you." Those words wrapped around me like armor, so instead of falling apart at that table, my hands stopped shaking. My vision cleared. I took a breath. I lifted my head and met Michael's eyes. "Thank you," I said. The room tilted for a second like everyone was confused. Michael rolled his eyes and reached for his glass as if I was being dramatic. I pushed my chair back, stood up, and added, "Thank you for showing me who you really are." No yelling, no tears, just a line drawn in the sand. Pattern interrupt, that was the exact moment our marriage ended for me, even though he didn't know it yet. I walked out of that dining room through the hallway full of family photos I was never really part of, past the kitchen that smelled like over-seasoned food and undercooked truth, and out the front door. I didn't slam it. I didn't want to give them the satisfaction of calling me hysterical. The night air hit me like a slap. Cool, sharp, almost too clean after that suffocating room. I made it to the end of the walkway before my legs started trembling. Not from the cold, from shock. Poor fat pig. The words echoed in my head on repeat, like a song you don't want to listen to but can't turn off. But here's the strange part. I didn't cry. Not then. Pain comes loud, but numbness comes quietly. And that quiet can change everything. I started walking. 1 block, then another. My heels clicked on the pavement. My dress swayed around my body. The body he had decided to turn into an insult. Streetlights cast long shadows on the sidewalk. The neighborhood was quiet, but inside my head, it felt like a storm. I sat down on a stone bench under a lamppost and just breathed. For the first time in a long time, I stopped making excuses for him in my head. I didn't blame the stress, or the bank, or the market. I looked at the pattern, the snide comments about my body, the way he talked about my simple life, the way he dismissed my questions about the company, about our future, about the emotional distance growing between us. What I had been calling stress was something else entirely, contempt. And once you name it, you can't unsee it. I stared at my own hands resting in my lap. Soft, steady. The same hands that had cooked his meals, folded his shirts, touched his face, signed documents he knew nothing about. My heart felt oddly still, like it had decided something before my brain caught up. I reached into my purse, pulled out my phone, and scrolled to a number I almost never used. It wasn't a friend. It wasn't family. It was my mother's old lawyer, the woman who had been the guardian of my inheritance after she died. "Miss Green," she answered, voice calm. Professional, warm around the edges, like always. Is everything all right? "Yes," I said, and even I could hear how flat my voice sounded. "Move the acquisition date." She paused. "For which asset?" 44B, I replied. "Move it to tomorrow morning. I'll be there in person. I want to speak to the board myself." There was another pause, heavier this time. Ms. Green knew me well enough to hear the shift, the way softness had turned into quiet steel. "As you wish," she said finally. "I'll handle everything. The other side will be notified that the new owner's representative wants a meeting." I ended the call, took a long breath, and stood up from the bench. I walked home with steady steps. My marriage was collapsing. His family was crumbling, and none of them had any idea that the buyer they were praying for had just set a clock. Before I tell you what happened in that boardroom, I need to tell you who I really am. Because up to this point, you only know the version of me that they saw. The quiet wife, the soft body, the simple dress, the poor nobody. That was only half the story. I grew up watching my mother, Olivia Hale, build and control a corporate empire that most people never even knew had a face behind it. To the world, she was a rumor in business circles, the quiet mastermind who could turn around a dying company without ever appearing in a photo. To me, she was the woman who made scrambled eggs in an old kitchen and wore the same cream-colored scarf until the edges frayed. I still have that scarf, by the way. I keep it folded on a shelf in my living room like something sacred. When I was about 8, she took me to a formal business event. I wore a stiff little dress and shoes that clicked on the marble floors. Men in expensive suits shuffled their feet, while my mother signed papers on a shiny conference table. One of them looked down at me and said, "Your daughter is very observant." My mother smiled and replied, "She's learning early." I was. I watched the way her pen moved with certainty, the way the room bent around her without her ever raising her voice. She didn't brag, she didn't posture, she didn't need to. Power sat quietly on her shoulders. On the drive home, I asked her, "Does it feel good, having that much power over people?" She looked at me into the rearview mirror and said, "Power isn't for showing off, Emma. It's for protecting what matters." That line lodged itself in my chest and never left. When I was 19, my mother died. One day, I was a college student trying to make sense of economics textbooks. The next day, I was sitting in another conference room full of lawyers and documents prettier than any diploma. You inherit everything one of them said, all of it. I remember gripping the chair so hard, my knuckles turned white. "I don't want people to treat me differently," I whispered. "I don't want everyone to look at me and see money." Ms. Green leaned forward, her glasses catching the light. "Then we'll make you invisible," she said. "Everything stays in your birth name. No link to whatever name you take if you marry. You can live however you want, and the world will never know who you really are. So that's what we did. We created layers of holding companies' encrypted systems, coded files. To the outside world, every acquisition, every investment, every transfer belonged to entities with bland names and cold labels. To the people in those boardrooms, I was just a signature at the end of a contract, a quiet force they never saw. On those documents, I stayed Emma Hale. In everyday life, I became just Emma. Years later, when I met Michael Carter, I had already decided how I wanted to live. I chose a small, cozy, rented townhouse instead of a mansion. I chose second-hand furniture that I fixed up myself instead of custom-made pieces. I chose simple clothes that made me feel comfortable rather than designer labels that screamed for attention, not because I hated wealth, but because I had seen what it did to people. I had watched men try to marry my mother's bank account and ignore her heart. I had watched friends evaporate when a deal didn't go through. I promised myself I would never let money be the reason someone loved me. So when I told Michael I worked a simple job and came from a modest life, I wasn't exactly lying. I was just leaving out the part where, on paper, I controlled more assets than his entire family combined. In the beginning, he loved that about me. At least he said he did. He used to pull me close on the couch, resting his hands on my softer stomach, and say, "I love soft things. Soft blankets, soft music, soft girls." Back then, it sounded romantic. Back then, his hands were gentle. When we got married, my lawyers made sure nothing about my birth name ever touched the marriage license. I signed that as Emma Carter. Everything that mattered stayed as Emma Hale. Carter was the name I used for neighbors, for family dinners, for the woman at the grocery store who commented on how much pasta I bought. Hale was the name on the contracts that moved markets. Michael never asked many questions about my mother's business. If I mentioned the company she used to run, his eyes glazed over. If I tried to talk about investments, he'd laugh and say, "You sound like one of those finance podcasters," then change the subject. So I stopped bringing it up. It was easier to let him think of me as simple. He liked that word when things were good. He weaponized it when things got hard. As Carter Industries started to slide downhill, bad decisions, outdated strategies, debt piling up, Michael turned into someone sharper, colder. He became busy all the time in meetings under pressure. Every problem at work seemed to get taken out on everything at home. He'd sigh when I moved too slowly in the kitchen, roll his eyes when I forgot some minor detail, mutter things under his breath like, "You never understand what I'm going through," or, "You don't know what real pressure is, Emma, you live so small." Meanwhile, every night after he went to bed, or claimed he had to stay late at the office, I would sit at our small table in the living room, open my laptop, and join an encrypted video call with Ms. Green. Behind my modest walls and bargain store curtains, we reviewed portfolios that could swallow Carter Industries in one bite. On my screen, everything showed up as numbers and codes. 44A, 44B, 45C, C51F. It was a security measure my mother had insisted on years ago. No logos, no brand names, no family surnames. Just performance risk structure. Emotion stayed out of the picture. One night while Michael was in the shower, muttering to himself about how no one understands real stress, my laptop lit up with the incoming call. I wrapped my mother's cream scarf a little tighter around my shoulders, like I always did when business was serious, and clicked accept. "Emma, we need to move quickly tonight," Ms. Green said. "The market window on several assets is closing. One in particular, 44B, is worth your attention." "Tell me," I said. "It's a failing company, but structurally strong," she explained. "Old family-run business, 3 generations. Good contracts, terrible recent management. Our research shows it could return to profit under the right owner. The price is favorable. Anonymity remains intact. It fits your mother's old profile almost perfectly. Something tugged at my chest, a weird, nameless tension. Any conflicts with what we already own? I asked. None, she replied. It sits in manufacturing and logistics, a sector you've revived before. On their side, they will only see your holding company. Your personal identity will remain on our internal documents only. I stared at the graphs and charts. Everything looked clean, cold, safe. Just another struggling business we could quietly rescue. I trust your judgment, I said, and picked up my stylus. Approve 44B. Let's move forward. I signed my name, Emma Hale, at the bottom of that faceless document, and moved on to 44A, 45C, the rest of the stack. To me, it was just another night of work. Here's the twist. 44B was Carter Industries. I didn't know that when I signed. That name never appeared on my side of the files. It only existed on Ms. Green's back end, buried under security protocols and confidentiality clauses. But the moment that digital ink dried, my holding company became the silent owner of my husband's failing family empire. The buyer his father was praying for. The investor he assumed was some faceless billionaire who might be impressed by his last name. It was me. On paper, I owned their future. But in real life, I was still the wife he called a poor fat pig. Stick around, because what happened when those two truths finally collided in the same room will blow your mind. Before the dinner, before the insult, there was another moment I need to tell you about. It's the day I stopped being able to lie to myself about what was happening between Michael and Jessica. He kept talking about this cafe near his office. Great coffee, quiet, perfect for strategy meetings, he'd say. His shirt started to smell like a perfume I didn't wear. He got more protective of his phone, always face down, always locked, always just emails. One afternoon, I decided to do something small and kind. I baked his favorite pastries, the ones he used to say tasted like soft hugs when we were first dating. Packed them in a little container, wrapped it in a cloth my mother once used, and drove over to the cafe to surprise him. I parked across the street, smoothed my dress over my stomach, told myself not to overthink every little weird feeling. He's stressed, I whispered. He needs support, not suspicion. When I stepped onto the sidewalk and looked through the big front window, my heart dropped straight to the concrete. There he was, Michael. Leaning slightly forward over a small table, shoulders relaxed, face lit up with a smile I hadn't seen directed at me in months. Across from him sat Jessica, in a sleek blouse, perfectly done hair, reaching out to casually tug his tie, while she laughed at something he had just said. The angle and the sunlight turned the glass into a kind of mirror, so I couldn't see every detail. But I could see enough. The space between them was less than the space between us had been for a long time. I froze. My hand tightened on the pastry container until my knuckles ached. Every part of me wanted to march inside, slam the box on the table, and ask him. Point blank, what is this? But another part of me, the part trained by years of swallowing hurt to keep the peace, stepped to the side instead. I slid against the wall, moved near a column, where I could see them without being seen, and watched. Jessica leaned in again, resting her hand on his forearm this time. He didn't pull away. He smiled. He looked happy. My chest felt like someone had taken a fistful of glass and dropped it inside. I turned my head slightly away, blinking hard to keep my vision from blurring. I didn't want to cry in public. Not there, not in front of them. Inside the cafe at another table, one of Michael's junior employees was pretending not to watch. He had seen them together before. He knew more than I did. And when he looked up and saw me standing outside with that container clutched to my chest, he recognized me from the photo on Michael's desk. He saw my face, and something in his expression changed. He pulled out his phone, tilted it, and snapped a picture through the glass. I didn't know that part until later. In that moment, all I knew was that, eventually, Michael stood up, checked his watch, and headed for the door. Jessica reached for his wrist, said something that made him smirk, and he said, "I gotta go. My wife will start asking questions like being my husband was an inconvenience." Then he laughed. He walked right past the corner where I was standing. I tucked myself behind the column, hiding the pastries behind my back, like I was the one being unfaithful. He didn't see me. He was too busy scrolling through his phone. I watched him leave. I didn't call out. I didn't follow. I took the pastries home, put them on the counter, and sat at the table staring at them until the sun went down. On the way back, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. "You deserve to know who he spends his time with." There was a photo attached. It loaded slowly like the universe wanted to drag out the pain. When it finally cleared, I saw exactly what I had seen in person captured forever through that glass. Michael leaning toward Jessica, their heads close, her fingers twisted in his tie. No excuses, no "you misunderstood," just visible truth. If it were you seeing that picture, would you still have gone to that dinner? Would you still have given him one more chance? I did. Because my heart hadn't caught up to my eyes yet. You already know what happened at that dinner. You know about the insult, the silence, the bench, the phone call. You know that by the time I walked home that night, my marriage was over in my heart and my mind. The only thing left was paperwork. When I got home, the townhouse felt different. The same couch, the same soft lighting, the same second-hand table, but everything felt sharper, cleaner, like the air had shifted. I went straight to the bedroom closet, reached up to the highest shelf, and pulled down a small wooden box I hadn't opened in years. Inside were two things: my mother's letter and a folder. I unfolded the letter first. I already knew every word by heart, but still I read it again. "Use your inheritance when your heart is no longer safe." She had written that when I was barely old enough to understand what inheritance meant. Back then, it sounded dramatic. That night, it sounded like instruction. I put the letter down and picked up the folder. Inside were the documents that connected me, legally and privately, to the Hale Empire. Trusts, ownership structures, emergency protocols. I ran my fingers over my own name printed in black ink again and again. For so long, I had held back, thinking that if I stayed small on the outside, I could keep my heart safe on the inside. That if I didn't bring power into my marriage, my husband would never see me as a bank account instead of a partner. I had been wrong. He didn't need to know about my money, to treat me like I was worth nothing. So I made a decision. I was going to use the power my mother left me. Not to crush him, not to get revenge, but to get away. To protect what mattered. My dignity, my peace, and believe it or not, his employees, who had nothing to do with his cruelty. By morning, everything was set. Across town in the glass building with the Carter Industries logo on it, Michael and his father were losing their minds. Richard paced at the head of the boardroom table, papers spread around him like a storm. "We need this investor," he kept saying. "If they don't show, we're finished. The bank wants an answer by the end of the week." Michael checked his watch every 30 seconds, trying to hide how frantic he was. "She'll come," he said. "Investors don't walk away from saving an entire company." Jessica sat too close, hand on his arm. Voice soft and supportive. Board members exchanged looks, half pretending not to notice, half terrified of what would happen if everything fell apart. They were all waiting for a savior. None of them expected her to walk in wearing my face. When I got there, the receptionist's eyes widened just a little. I had been in that building before as the wife, the woman who dropped off lunch, the woman who waved politely, the woman no one looked twice at. That morning I wore a simple, well-cut suit that actually fit my body the way it was, not the way magazines say it should be. My curves weren't hidden, just dressed in fabric that respected them. I held a leather folder in one hand and my purse in the other. My heart beat steady. The assistant opened the boardroom door and announced, "The new owner's representative is here." Everyone stood halfway expecting someone else. Then I walked in. You should have seen their faces. Michael's jaw literally dropped. His father went pale. Jessica's hand slipped off his arm like she'd touched a hot stove. The board members looked from me to the documents in front of them and back like they were trying to do math that didn't add up. Emma. Michael stammered. "What are you doing here?" I walked to the end of the table, set my folder down, and looked around the room. "Good morning," I said. "Thank you for meeting me. I know it's been a difficult few weeks." Richard shook his head like he could physically shake off reality. "This isn't possible," he snapped. "The investor bought through an anonymous holding company. There's been some mistake." I opened the folder, pulled out the share transfer documents, and turned them around so everyone could see the signatures and the official seals. "There's no mistake," I said quietly. "Your company, Carter Industries, was acquired by my holding group as Asset 44B. I am here as the majority owner representing that group." Whispers broke out across the room. She bought the company. His wife. How did we not know? Is that legal? The board members were flicking through their copies now, seeing what had been there the whole time. Michael's voice cracked. "You're lying. There's no way you have that kind of money. You're just..." He stopped himself just in time, but everyone in that room heard the word he almost said. Poor. He almost said poor. I looked directly at him for the first time. "I didn't come here to argue with you about what I can or can't afford," I said. "I'm here to discuss the future of this company." One of the older board members cleared his throat and adjusted his tie. "With this ownership stake," he said carefully, "she does have full authority. Everything appears to be in order." I nodded. "Thank you," I said. "Given the urgency of the situation, I've already taken a few steps." From my folder, I pulled out 2 envelopes and slid them down the table. One to Richard, one to Michael. They opened them, eyes scanning the pages, faces draining of color. Termination notices, effective immediately. As majority owner, I said I cannot keep executives who mismanage funds, ignore clear warning signs, and treat their employees and families with the kind of disrespect I've witnessed. Effective today, Richard Carter and Michael Carter are removed from their positions. "You can't fire me," Michael said. Voice rising, hands gripping the table. A board member on his left murmured, "She actually can." No one rushed to defend him. Funny how fast loyalty moves when the power shifts. I wasn't done. I pulled out another envelope and placed it directly in front of Michael. "This," I said, "is the result of an internal audit I ordered as soon as the acquisition timeline was moved." Inside were printed photos of him and Jessica at expensive dinners, at hotel lobbies, at bars after work. There were screenshots of messages pulled from company devices. There were flagged charges showing company funds used for client entertainment that had nothing to do with clients. Jessica went white. She scooted her chair away from him inch by inch, suddenly very aware that sitting next to a sinking ship is a good way to drown. "Emma, I can explain," Michael started, voice shaking, eyes darting between me, the photos, and the board. "I'm not interested in your explanations," I said evenly. "I'm interested in clarity. They needed to know why I'm not just removing you for incompetence, but also for gross misuse of company funds." Then I pulled out one last folder thinner than the rest and set it in front of him. "This," I said, "is the petition for dissolution of our marriage. On grounds of emotional abuse, public humiliation, infidelity, and the misuse of marital resources. From now on, any communication you want to have with me will go through my lawyer." The room went silent. Some people stared at the table. Some stared at me. Some stared at him, seeing maybe for the first time the full picture of who he really was when the doors were closed. I gathered my documents, closed my folder, and straightened up. "Unless there are any urgent questions," I said, "I'll leave you to begin preparing the transition plans. My team will coordinate with yours for the employees' sake. As for you," I glanced at Michael and Richard one last time, "your access ends today." Then I walked out. Pattern interrupt. I didn't look back, not even once. He chased me again. He always chased me after it was too late. He burst out of the building as I reached the black car, waiting for me on the curb. Ms. Green stood beside it, speaking quietly with the driver. The glass doors reflected his twisted, panicked face as he shoved them open and stumbled down the steps. "Emma, Emma, please," he shouted. His tie was crooked. His hair was a mess. His briefcase hung from one hand, like he didn't know what to do with it anymore. I reached for the car door. The driver opened it for me. I could hear Michael's footsteps slapping against the pavement behind me. "Emma, wait," he gasped. "I swear I can fix this. We can fix us." I didn't mean what I said. I was just stressed. You know how it is. You know me? That was the problem. I did know him now. Too well. I slid into the back seat, my suit pulling smoothly, my heart quiet. The driver closed the door. As the car pulled away, Michael fell to his knees on the pavement, this time with an audience. Board members at the windows, employees at the revolving doors, strangers walking by. Inside the car, I looked straight ahead. No tears, no shaking, just a strange sense of release. He tried to call. My phone never rang. He got my lawyer instead. "Mr. Carter," Miss Green said. When she answered one of his many calls, "This is Ms. Green. I'll be handling all communication for Emma from now on." "Put her on the phone," he demanded. "I'm afraid that won't be possible," she replied. "And since I have you, you are officially served." Right on cue, a process server approached him outside his building with a large envelope. He opened it on the spot. Divorce petition. Claims listed neatly in bold: emotional abuse, public humiliation, infidelity, misuse of company funds. Later, when he tried to go back into Carter Industries like nothing had happened, security stopped him. "Your access card has been deactivated, sir," the guard said. "New owner's orders. HR will mail your personal items." "My wife owned the company," Michael muttered, like saying it would somehow make it less real. "She's not your wife anymore, sir," the guard said quietly. He went to Jessica next. Maybe he thought she'd be his soft landing. He pounded on her apartment door until she opened it just a crack. She looked him up and down, took in the disheveled suit and wild eyes, and sighed. "Oh," she said, "it's you. Jessica, please," he begged, reaching out. "You're all I have left. I just need—" She stepped back, folding her arms. A man with no job, no status, and no future. She asked, voice suddenly much colder than it had been at those cozy cafe tables. "Why would I stay with you?" He stared at her, stunned. "But you said you cared about me." She shrugged. "I said a lot of things. It was fun while you were useful. I'm not going down with a loser." Then she shut the door in his face. Harsh, maybe. Undeserved, depends who you ask. When he went back to his parents' house, the one where he had called me a poor fat pig, looking for comfort, he got something else entirely. Richard shouted that it was all his fault, that he'd pushed away the only person who could have saved them. His mother cried and asked how he could have treated me that way. His brother shook his head, disappointed. Everyone who had stayed silent when I was humiliated suddenly had a lot to say now that their safety net was gone. And me, I was in a different office. My office. Weeks later, after the legal dust started to settle, I walked into the top floor space that used to be Richard's. The heavy wooden door swung open and banged lightly against the stop. Sunlight poured across a desk that no longer held his nameplate. Instead, it held mine. Emma Hale, Chief Executive Officer. Not Carter, not Mrs. Michael, just me. I sat down in that chair, feeling the weight of it. The history in the walls, the fear in the stacks of reports waiting on the desk. I had a lot of work to do, not just to clean up their financial mess, but to rebuild a culture that didn't treat people like disposable tools. I signed the final stack of CEO documents, each stroke of my pen, erasing a little bit more of the version of me they'd been so sure about. From my purse, I pulled out my mother's letter one more time. Use your inheritance when your heart is no longer safe. I pressed it to my chest, but this time it didn't hurt. This time it felt like a blessing. Across town, Michael sat in a small apartment he used to use as an I-have-to-work-late crash spot. Now it was just where he lived. Alone. On his table lay the final divorce decree. No claim to my wealth, no claim to the company, no claim to the life he had mocked and wasted. Neighbors avoided eye contact. Former co-workers avoided his calls. Jessica had blocked his number. His parents only spoke to him when they had to. And every now and then, I hope he heard his own voice echoing back at him in that empty space. You're just a poor fat pig. You should be grateful that anyone married you. Funny how quickly that sentence stopped aging well. One afternoon, I walked through the Carter, now Hale-owned building lobby. Employees whispered as I passed. That's her, the new owner. I thought she was just his quiet wife. She saved our jobs. She bought everything. I heard she fired him in front of the whole board. I didn't stop to correct or confirm anything. I didn't give speeches or demand applause. I just walked through the glass doors into the sunlight, my purse swinging at my side. If you could have looked into that purse, you would have seen two things. A photo of my mother, smiling in that way that always made me feel 5 years old and safe again. A folded divorce decree, final and irreversible. 2 pieces of paper that told the story of everything I'd lost and everything I'd reclaimed. So that's my story. The story of how a quiet, soft-bodied, underestimated woman turned out to be the secret billionaire holding the ground under her husband's feet. The story of how a man who thought he was out of her league discovered she was playing in a whole different game. Now I want to ask you, if you had been at that dinner table and heard those words, would you have spoken up? Or would you have stared at your plate like his family did? Do you think someone like Michael deserves a second chance? Or are there lines that once crossed mean we're done forever? And here's the big one. Why do you think people still feel so comfortable attacking someone's body, their softness, their size, as if that says anything about their worth? Do you think that's fair? Tell me what you think in the comments. Argue with me if you want. Share your own stories. If you've ever been underestimated, body-shamed, or treated like you were less than only to find your strength later. I read those stories, and someone out there needs to see that they're not alone. If you believe that quiet people, soft people, ordinary-looking people can carry extraordinary power, hit like, subscribe, and send this video to someone who needs a reminder of what they're worth. Because sometimes the most dangerous person in the room isn't the one who shouts the loudest. It's the one who finally decides to walk away and take everything they own with them.